What's going on, everybody? Jesse here, and welcome back to the inventory system tutorial series. This is episode 2. If you haven't seen episode 1, then I suggest you go watch that first, because every video in this series will build off of the one before, and the one before that, and the one before that. Fortunately, this is only episode 2, so you don't have too much to watch before getting to this point. So I just want to give you guys a quick preview of where we should be at the end of this video. So right here, we've got a couple items in the world that we are able to just kind of set in place. So this way we have something to start adding to our inventory as we move forward through the series. So when we press play, you can see, boom, we've got some items here that spawned into the world, and you can see them disappear. One of them was a bread item. The other one was a red berry item, but I gave them a lifespan. That's something we can talk about as we move forward here, but generally that's about where you should be when we end this video. So sit back, relax, and let's get this thing going. All right, now that we're back in our project, I want to do a little bit of restructuring here that probably should have did in the last video, but this shouldn't take too long to do. I was just in here thinking about it, and I think we should probably get a little bit better organization for a couple things here. So I'm in the items folder here. So let's just go ahead and add a couple more folders here. We're going to end up having to add more as we move forward here, but let's go ahead and name one of these food, because we're going to make food items today. Let's go ahead and jump into the food folder, and let's make a few folders in here. So let's do a folder. We will call this one materials. Another folder, we'll call this textures, and one more, let's call this one meshes. Inside the textures folder, let's add one folder inside of here, and let's call this one icons. All right, now that we got that, let's jump into our struct that we made in the last episode. And for our struct, it starts out with one variable in here, so we'll make this one, we'll call this one item. This particular one, this will house our item that we're going to pass around to the world object. You'll see here in just a little bit, but this will be the reference to the item class that we are going to be passing around. BP base item. Make sure that this is set to a class reference. Let's add another variable here. This one we will call quantity. And as I'm sure you would expect, this is just the amount of items that will be held by this object in the inventory. This one we will set as an integer. Let's go ahead and add another variable here. This one we're actually going to call owning inventory, and this will keep track of the inventory that is actually controlling this item in the array. So this will need to be of type AC underscore inventory component. I had a little issue with this. I had to actually go back into my inventory component up here that you can see up top and recompile it and save it, and now I can see it. For some reason I couldn't see it in this list, but now I can, now that I went and recompiled that. So make sure that's an object reference. If you can't find that in here for some reason, just head into this component, compile, save it. And I actually went into the blueprint component because it wasn't quite on this stage yet, but that's all I had to do, and it showed right up for me. So let's go ahead and add another one, and for now this should be the last one. Let's call this one index location, and this will help us keep track of where at in the array this item is. Let's go ahead and save it. Let's jump right over here to the default values, and with the default values right here, we're going to take the default item and we're actually going to make this a base item. We're going to make a change to this in just a few minutes, and I'll explain that to you, but let's go ahead and make the default item as a base item. This is something that will never be called, but it will be nice to have this in case we have to, so we always are able to pull the default variables and stuff from this. All right, quantity we'll leave at 0. Owning inventory is going to be none, and then the item location, actually I made a mistake here. The item location will need to be an integer, or the index location need to be an integer. Come over here, and the default value of this set as -1. This will help us down the road. So if we get a -1, we know that it's not currently in any spot in the inventory. So -1. Go ahead and save that. All right, so let's go ahead and head over to the BP base item here. And if you get this, just open the full blueprint editor. We're going to add a bunch of variables in here. We'll eventually come back and probably add a function or two in here in the base item. But for now, let's just set up the primary variables. Now remember, this is the grandparent, the granddaddy of them all. And so anything that we put in here should be applicable to all items that you want to create in the world. So everything's going to have a static mesh, everything's going to have a thumbnail, everything's going to have a stack size. So there's going to be certain things that we're going to need to know for every single item. As we move down and we start refining the process, you'll see like what we're going to do with the food next is then we'll start adding some extra stuff to those. But this only put in here the things that will be on every single item that you will need from every single item. So let's go over here to the variable. The first one, let's just go ahead and call this one static mesh. And this will be the static mesh that will be displayed in the item in the world when we spawn it in the world. Static mesh, you've got several options here. Where is it? Static mesh, object reference. And I will write some descriptions here. I'll do this one here. Okay, I'm not going to do all these on camera. I do write descriptions, I do write comments, I do a lot of these things, especially since I provide these as downloads for you guys. I do that because it's important, but also because when you come back to a project later in life, you go, wait, what did I have this for? You can just hover over this and you see, oh, the mesh that that will be displayed when we spawn it. So you know that. So just leave yourself notes, leave yourself breadcrumbs. Remember, those things won't be seen when the game's running, but they will definitely be helpful when you're developing the game. Let's add another one here. Call this one display name, and this will be of type name. Next one we'll call use action text. And this is just going to be, so for example, food, the use action, when you go to use it, what's it going to tell you? Well, food, the use action word for that would be eat. Liquids would be drink. So things of that nature, that's what this will be used for. We'll call this one a text type. Next variable, let's call this one thumbnail. Now this will be the thumbnail image that we use when we're displaying it in our inventory or in other locations similar to the inventory. This will need to be a texture 2D down here. Make sure it's the object reference. Next variable, call this one item description. This will also need to be a text. And this will be just a brief description that we end up creating for it. So like if you hover over it, you can get a little tooltip for it, or when we display it in the inventory or in the inventory screen, maybe there'll be a little box that pops up that gives you a description of what the item will be. That's what that box is for. Next variable, we will name this one stack size. Now this will determine how big of a stack an item can go together. If you're familiar with game, well, pretty much any game has some sort of limit. Almost every single one's differently. You know, like Minecraft, most objects are stackable up to 64, some only 16, some can't be stackable. That's generally what this is. So how many you can have in a stack per slot in your inventory. This will need to be an integer. Next variable, let's call this one B should die. Now B, lowercase b, that's just usually that's just used for booleans. You don't have to do that. The B doesn't show up if I take this and drop this out and get B. The B doesn't show up here, but it's just kind of, I can't even think of the word right now, but that's just tradition, I guess, with the booleans to be prefaced with the B. All right, so B should die. Now this is going to dictate whether we should allow this item to despawn in the world. We could talk about that in just a little bit. Let's finish up these variables here. And the next variable will be despawn time. This will need to be a float, and this is just kind of correlates to what we were just talking about with should die. If it should die, then this despawn time will dictate how long it will be alive in the world before it despawns. All right, so we got all that. Let's go ahead and compile it. Make sure you save it. And let's head on over to the BP food item. Right now, we're not going to do too much with this. The only thing we really need to do, if you get this screen, let's just go ahead and open up the full blueprint editor. The only thing we're going to really add to this right now is we're going to add an extra variable. We will call this one, since it's food, we will call this health amount. This will be the amount of health that is added when you consume this food item. Let's go ahead and make this a float and then compile it and save it. Now you can see here, just to show you, if we click class defaults, you're going to see, and you could have saw from that last screen as well, here's all the variables we just added from the BP base item. So these are all the defaults. Let's jump back in here to the BP base item, and let's just go ahead and set a couple of these defaults. Now, generally speaking, with parents, you don't want to set anything with the main parents, the objects that shouldn't be part of the world. You really shouldn't set anything with these unless it's absolutely necessary. So what I'm going to do here is, let's make sure that should die is set to nothing, to false, excuse me. Despawn time, we're going to leave that at 0. 0 is actually the number you want. If we pass 0 to the lifespan, that means it should not die. So 0 is kind of what you want there. Stack size, every item should at least stack to 1. So let's default that one to 1. Use action, let's default this. Let's just write something in here. We're going to write none. So just that way there's something. So if something happens, if we forget to implement this, then we get some sort of visual feedback. If we're running a print string or something, it'll say none instead of what we actually want. Display name, same thing. We'll keep that as none as well. Static mesh, leave that blank. Item description, we'll leave that blank as well. So compile that. Actually, before we compile it, go to here to the class settings. I was talking about we're going to make a change to this. If you come over here to the class settings, there's actually going to be something here. I think it's under advanced. Yeah, if you open up the advanced here underneath class options, we're going to make this a generate abstract class. Now, what this is going to do, this means that we can't actually spawn this item in the world. We can't really use this item. We can read these variables. We'll be able to do that, but it's going to prevent us from doing using these items. So if we were to come back here, let's compile this. If we come back here to the BP food, if we wanted to, actually, if we jump back over here to the F underscore inventory item, if you come here, even though we have BP base item in here, you can see it's actually removed from this list. If we were to create a variable, you'll see it in a little bit. This is going to come up again in a little bit. We can still use the BP base item, but it doesn't show up in a list for you to be able to select it. So it just kind of removes it. We're going to actually do the same thing with BP food here in just a minute. But yeah, so making abstract class just means you can't spawn into the world. It means it's just, it's there for data really only is all it's there for. So let's jump back out here to BP food. We created the health amount. Open up your content browser. So what we need to do now is come into the items, and I actually want to restructure this. Let's take this food, drag and drop it into this food folder. We'll move it here. Again, let's make sure whenever you move stuff around, come up to your content folder, right click on it, and just click fix up redirectors in the folder. It's always a good habit to do that. And then come down in here into the food. Now we got our food item right here. Let's just real quick, let's right click on this. Let's create a child blueprint from the food. Let's call this BP underscore bread. And then right click on the BP food again. Let's create another child, and we will call this BP underscore red berry. All right, we'll call it like that. Save it up. And if we go down here, let's start with the BP bread. Let's just go ahead and open that up. So now we got the class defaults. Now we got all this stuff. Now we're pinned down here, right? These are children. These are ones that will be displayed in the world. So now we can start setting some default values for this. So for the static mesh, we imported some of those other meshes earlier that we're going to use as test, just prototype meshes. Let's go ahead and make this one the shape cone. That will be its default mesh. Display name. The display name, now this, if I didn't say it earlier, display name, this is how it will be displayed when you're looking at it or hovering over it inside the inventory screen, things like that. This is just a quick descriptor word of what it actually is. Use text, this will be eat. Thumbnail, we'll come back to that in just a second. Write a quick item description. This is a loaf of bread that provides a small amount of health recovery. Something like that. That'll work. Stack size, you can make these numbers pretty much whatever you want now. It comes down to game mechanics and how you want your game to operate. There's some other considerations to take into account too, but generally these days you can set this virtually to whatever you want, but you set it too high and it's going to kind of defeat the purpose of an inventory system, right? And being able to control that. So at least a minimum of 1 is what you want. But for testing purposes for now, I'm just going to set the bread stack size to 3. Should this die, we won't enable that right now. Respawn timer, we will leave it 0. Let's go ahead and save this. And before we jump into the berry blueprint, let's go ahead and add a couple icons here. I have a couple icons I'm going to import for displaying here for the thumbnails. I'm not going to include these icons in the project download. These are things that I downloaded off the internet, so just for safety reasons. However, they are free to use. I just have to give them attribution, which is fine. I was going to do it anyway. So if you want these particular icons, go ahead and check down in the description. I'll have a couple links for each of these icons down there. You can use them if you'd like. But the source files for these will not be included in the project download, but they will be easy enough to replace should you want to use these or other ones. Open up the icons. I've got them here off the screen. Oops, and for some reason my content drawer dropped. Let's go ahead and take them and drop them in here into the icons. And then once it's done, reopen here. For some reason, it closes your content drawer. When you do that, go ahead and open the content drawer back up. And for textures and things like this, usually what I like to do is I come in here and I look this up and I'll have to look it up again to figure it out. But generally speaking, for things like this, for the compression, it makes the file size a little bit smaller. It compresses a little bit better. BC7 is going to be good for what we need on these. So I'm going to change that to BC7. That keeps the alpha in the background, even though it looks black in the content drawer. It does have an alpha background. Same thing with the red berries. I'm going to come in here and change this to BC7 as well. And you can set texture groups if you want to get through all that. One day we may look at doing all the extra stuff there, but for now, we're just going to change the compression settings. Make sure you save everything. We can close these back out. Now, if we come back in here into the BP bread for the thumbnail, drop this down, and this is the bread. So go ahead and select the bread icon and it will use that. So let's just go ahead and head over to the berry, not the berry icon. Let's go ahead and open up the food and the red berry page here. So again, we're going to set the defaults. We don't even have to do anything because this is a food item. Now, if we wanted this red berry to act a little bit differently than the bread, then we can add the extra functionality here. We can add a special variable here, or we can do functions. We can do things like that down the road. We're going to worry about the functions a little bit later. Right now, let's just get the default set up here. So for the health value on this, let's just set this one to, let's say 2. I don't remember what we set it for the bread. Let me look real quick. On the bread, we didn't even set anything on the bread. For the bread, I'm going to set this to, let's say 4 as a default value. And then back here in the BP red berry, the health amount to 2. Static mesh, we already used the cone, so I'm going to come down here to the cylinder. Display name, let's call this one red berries will be the display name. Again, this will be eat for the use action text. Scroll down, let's pick the red berry icon for the thumbnail. Red berries. It's a small amount of health recovery, just about like the other one, right? You can get more descriptive, and we probably will in the future. Stack size, I'm going to make this one a little bit different. What did we make it for the bread? We did a stack size of 3. Let's do a stack size of 2. Keeping it small like this will allow us to make sure that they stack while also enabling some of the other functionality. That way we don't have to have so many objects in the world. We can just have small stack size and do it that way. We'll leave the should die as false and despawn to 0. We'll go over to that stuff in just a minute. Compile it and save it. So yeah, we've got the default set up here for the red berry. So let's just go ahead and jump into the next section of this. Want to be a part of the conversation? Want to help decide the direction of my content moving forward? Or are you just looking for a group of like-minded people to talk with for support and ideas on your own projects? Then look no further and come join my Discord server. Together, we're building a community of support and a community to collaborate and build games with. Not a developer, but interested in game design? We have members of all types who are there to grow and assist each other. Membership to the server is free. However, should you decide you would like to support me in my efforts, then you can head over to my Patreon, where you can earn various benefits including early video previews, project downloads, direct support, and even monthly chats with me. If you would simply like to donate without the benefits, then you can also visit me on my Buy Me a Coffee page, where you can earn the same rewards as a Patreon, or you can simply give a one-time donation. Of course, donations are optional, but I do appreciate any and all support. Real quick before we jump in the next section, if you are a Patreon supporter and you are able to download this project and you go that route to do it, you will need to replace the references, the source file for these. If you end up using these same icons that I have, you're going to have to change the location of them. Otherwise, you're going to get some errors because it's not going to be able to find them because you don't have them, even if you download them. You got to change the source location of them. You can see right there at the bottom, it says source file. It actually points to the direction of my folder structure where they're at. So you'll have to change that. So let me show you how to do that. If you right click on it, come up here to edit. And then in this screen down here under file path, you'll see source file. Just click this right here and you can browse your computer for where you have the assets. If you don't end up using these icons, then you can just delete those and then put in whatever icons, assets that you want, and no harm, no foul. But that's how you would change that there. So let's just go ahead and jump back out into your content drawer. Jump up here to food and actually to items, I guess. Let's open up the BP world item and open up the full blueprint editor. Now again, this world item, this is what we're going to spawn into the world. This is what's going to be your primary single actor that's going to spawn all your different items within the world, at least the majority of them. It may be different for storage units. We'll see when we get to that point. But for now, let's consider this to be the main actor that we will spawn into the world. One of the first things I usually like to do is I like to come up here and add a scene component. I take that scene, name it root, and then I take and just drag and drop this on top of that, and now we got a scene component as the root component. You don't have to do that. I like doing it. It makes it a little bit cleaner, especially when you come in here to the viewport. You don't have that big ball in here that's going to drive you nuts. So while we're here in the viewport, let's go ahead and add a couple more components. First, let's just go ahead and add a billboard. This billboard, this will just kind of display for us in the world. You might be familiar with this. This will display the object in the world before it spawns, before it actually gets a static mesh. When we drag and drop it out there, this is what's going to show. We're going to actually change it up a little bit. You probably saw at the very beginning that I had the bread icon for this, and I'll show you. We'll change that up and do that here. Actually, we could probably go ahead and do that now. If you want to do it, just go ahead and drag and drop it and select your bread icon. I'm going to move this up just a little bit so it's not below the surface when we pull it out and spawn. You might want to move it a little bit higher. Having something like this that indicates food, you can use something different if you want, but that way if you have a bunch of items that will spawn in the world at start, you know that everything that has this icon will be food. So it's good to do this instead of leaving it as the default dragon head. And let's go ahead and add one more. We will do static mesh. Select that, and let's just name this display mesh. Display mesh, and make sure if it's under billboard, if you messed up like I did and had billboard highlighted when you added something, it's going to child it to it. We don't want that. Put it under root. We're going to attach it to the root, so that way they're separate objects. Make sure all your values are set. Jump over to the event graph. I'm going to delete the overlap and the tick. And so what we need to do now is let's just go ahead and create a couple variables here. This is going to end up having to change as we move forward, but this will get us started. First variable, we will call this item. And you probably guessed it. This is going to be of type BP underscore base item. Make sure we do class reference here. Next variable, we're going to call this quantity, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, the concept of quantity and some of the ideas I had while I was preparing for this video that I think are going to be something integral that we're going to want to do moving forward. We'll discuss that in a minute, but let's make that of type integer, variable, and one more. We'll call this one despawn time, and this will need to be a float. Let's go ahead and compile that now. So now what we need to do, now we need to display, we need to set this display mesh. So let's click this item. Remember, we talked about this before. If you've watched any of my recently new videos, especially the one about object classes, how we're doing this structure here. If you haven't watched that, then please, I encourage you to go watch that. The card should be up there in the top right-hand corner. Go check that out so you kind of get an idea of what we're doing and why we're doing this system with the object classes. But as you noticed in that, if you did watch that, you'll remember that I talked about this being a none. So we got to set this. We got to set a default value here. Now remember, we went over and we made the food item, or excuse me, the base item, an abstract class. Now we actually want to do the same thing with the BP food, the parent food. We don't want that really spawned into the world either. So let's go into the BP food, select class settings, and under advanced, generate abstract class, we select that. Make sure you go ahead and save it. And then if we come back out here to the BP world and in the item variable, now you'll see both the food and the base class are gone. We don't actually want to select one of these. This is going to be dictated what it's going to be a little bit later. We actually want the base item. So if we come in here, you can't select it. So what we can do actually is open up your content drawer, go up to the main items here, and we want it to be the base item. So you could select one of those other food items if you want, but I would highly recommend not, because this is just the base here. So select the base, just make sure it's highlighted, come in here and then click that arrow and it's there for you. So you still can't see it in the list, but it is selected as your default item. Quantity, let's go ahead and make sure you leave that as a quantity of 0 as a default value there. All right, and then despawn, we'll leave that as 0 for now too. I'll show you how that works in just a minute. Begin play. Let's grab our display mesh. We'll just grab it from down here. Let's get the variable and go set static mesh. Okay. Hook that up. Now let's pull out the item and get the default classes, the default variables in the class, and take the static mesh and let's just plug it in there. So now whatever we end up setting this as, whatever item it is that we have in the world, it will bring it off of here and set it. Next, let's grab the should die, put a branch into the world, hold B and click in the world. Take off of this, let's plug that into the branch, and that way it knows should we die or not. Now, the concept behind having it die or despawn in the world, it's one that you're going to have to decide if you want to do or not. It's something that's important and should be done, I think, but there are some cases where you may not want to do it. Again, it's game related, so it's a decision you're going to have to make. But if you think about a game, you know, I like to use Minecraft as an example because most everybody knows it, almost everybody's played it, but their items despawn after 5 minutes. If you think about all the items that you can throw in the world or that you can mine and all the blocks all over the world, if they didn't despawn, that game's already tough to run sometimes. But if you've got thousands of items in the world just sitting there floating, you're gonna hog up a lot of RAM and processing in your game. So there's certain things that you should probably have die. But there's other things as you move forward that you probably don't. So, but generally speaking, most things should. So let's just check this branch. But that's the concept behind it. It's going to be totally up to you. I'll make whatever decisions I end up making as we move forward and do some more here. I'm actually going to, before that branch, I'm going to set the despawn time. I'm just going to take the despawn time from the class defaults, take it and plug it into there, so that way we have that. So now if we should die, then what we want to do is I'm going to do a separate event. You don't have to do the separate event. I kind of wanted this as a separate event, just so we can call it a little bit later, but a custom event. I'm going to call this one set despawn timer. So the main reason why I'm doing this is because if you don't know, what we're going to do here is we're going to go set life. There's a built-in function called set lifespan. And if you read the tooltip here, it says set the lifespan of this actor. When it expires, the object will be destroyed. If requested lifespan is 0, the timer is cleared and the actor will not be destroyed. So there's several things we could do with this. It saves us a little bit of functionality of having to write our own destroy code, but we can set the default timer here, and if we change this, we can always update this. As long as it hasn't counted down to 0, we can update it. We can call this function again, which we take our despawn time and we plug it into here. We can call it again and it's going to reset the timer. And I'll explain my theory behind doing that in just a couple minutes, but you'll reset the timer so it'll start over if you call this function. However, you can also change this even if this is counting down. If for some reason mid game you decide you don't want one particular object to despawn in the world, you can grab that object that's in the world, change, or you can set the, I'm pointing at my screen like you can see, you can set the set lifespan to 0 even though it's counting down, even though it's active. If you set it to 0, then that will, just like the tooltip says here, it will clear it and the actor will not be destroyed. But if it counts down to 0 without interruption, then it will be destroyed. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but that's kind of the logic for me doing this. All right, so let's go ahead and compile it now and save it. Again, yeah, we changed that there. So I think that we can now put this into the world. All right, before we get any further, actually, I want to go ahead and do a couple more things here that it just kind of popped up in my head. Is we need to come over here to the item variable and click the little eyeball quantity, the little eyeball. Then we need to also come up here with the variable selected and choose expose on spawn. We're going to want to change these. If we're dropping these into the world, we're going to want to change these from the world outliner. So doing that is something we're going to need to do. Also, come down here to quantity. Let's set its default value to 1. If this is being spawned into the world, remember this is the actor that's going to be spawned in the world. If it's being spawned in the world, then it's got to have a quantity of at least 1. This is something we're going to change down the road to be dynamic, but it needs to have at least a default of 1. Another issue I got to realizing was we set this billboard to be the bread. Well, this is going to be defaulted bread for everything. I said it's good to know which items are food and which ones aren't food, and that wasn't really the smart thing to do, because now everything is going to show this food icon. So we need to be able to change that. So one way we can do that is if we come back in here into the BP base item, and let's go ahead and add another variable, and let's call this one, well, we'll just call it billboard texture, and set this to a, I believe, hopefully this is right, a texture 2D. I believe it's the same thing here, texture 2D object reference. Save that. Let's change this texture to be default. Remember, I told you setting defaults here in the main base item isn't always the best, but let's set this to make sure we default to the s_actor. Ooh, I don't know why we don't have access to it. Let me find this real quick and show you guys how to get this correct billboard up. All right, actually that wasn't too difficult for me to figure out. S_actor, that is the correct name, but if we come over here to the little gear icon and scroll it down to show engine content, and there we go. That's the billboard that we want. Go ahead and select that. It's going to default here. I'm going to open this back up though, and I'm going to come back into here and deselect that, so that way next time we're searching for a texture, we don't get flooded with a bunch of the engine content as well. But that's how you find the engine content from the variable type. So let's go ahead and make sure you save it. Come back over here now. So now our default billboard will be that. So if we come over here to the food, you can see that same thing here is the same as the original, and same thing for the children as well. So we've got that, we've got red berry defaulted to that. So if we come back over here to the BP food, now we want all the food to have the same indicator texture as each other, so that way we just know when it's the world. For our example here, we're going to use the bread icon. So now if we compile that, then we come back over here to the BP bread, you're going to see now that the billboard texture set there, the billboard texture set for the berries. Come back to the base item, and it stayed the same because it's the parent. So we changed that. That's the parent-child hierarchy in action. So that really worked out pretty good for us. So now what we need to do is we come out here to the BP world item. So now in order to get that to work, you can see we still get the bread here because we're defaulting it to the bread. If we were to reset it, you'll see the dragons there, but this still doesn't even know. This is just the default for any billboard. So let's come into the construction script actually and drag the item class variable in here. Let's get class defaults and pull out for the billboard texture. Let's actually go like this and set, where is it? Set, let's see, what are we trying to set on here? So we come over here, set sprite. All right, so set sprite billboard. Yeah, we don't need to, I don't think we need to set UV. Let's do set sprite billboard, and for whatever reason it gave us that variable. Pull out again, take our texture 2D, set it into the new sprite. So now hopefully this should work. If we come over here and compile it, now it's not going to change here in the window, but we should see it when we go out and drag on the map. So let's go back out here to the map and let's drag some items into the world. Open up your content drawer and let's find the BP world items. Let's just take this now and let's just drag it out here into the world. We got the first one there. I'm just going to alt and click the little arrow here to make a second one. And let's go ahead and position this just a little bit better here for us. Set this up. So now again, we still have the dinosaur head on here, the dragon head, whatever that is. That's because it still thinks it's the base class. It's still defaulted to the base class. So with this first one selected, let's drag this open a little bit here. We got the item variable right here, BP base item. That's what we set it. That's what its default class is. But we need to take this and set this to, we're going to make this left one BP bread, and boom, you can see the texture automatically changed for us. So go ahead and do this one on the right. I'm going to make this one on the right. We're going to make this one red berry. You can see that texture changed as well. See, there we go. Now we got the billboard and it's changed. So now if you do that for all of them, it'll indicate. So you got to imagine in the world, you're going to have hundreds or thousands of different items in the world. So these billboards really are going to help you out, and you just don't want a bunch of dragon heads. So just go ahead and try to set those up. So now what we need to do is we've got that set to berry. We've got this set to bread. If we, let's go ahead and Control Alt Shift. Let's make sure we save everything. Let's save this one again just to make sure. Press play. And now we should see here that we have these all set up. So let's go ahead and show you the despawn item lifespan here. So let's go to red berry. I'm going to make this one default should die. I'm going to set that to true. And then the despawn time, let's just go ahead and set this something low. We'll set it to 5 seconds. And let's go ahead and compile it and save it. Now if we come back out here without changing anything, hit play, and the berries here should despawn. Oh, you know why it didn't? And I knew this before I even started, and I still didn't correct myself. Let's go ahead and stop this. Come back in here to the BP world and to the event graph. Right here under should die in the begin play, we didn't tell it to call this function. So don't mind me. It is currently almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Actually, it's about 12:30 in the morning. So I'm a little tired. Let's just go ahead and do set despawn timer. Hook this up to true. So now it should call that. Let's compile it and save it. Head back out here and hit play. Now we should see the berries despawn. Boom. There it is. I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thanks for stopping by. If you found this video useful, please do me a favor. Go down, hit that like button. If you're not a subscriber, go ahead and subscribe. If you haven't already joined the Discord, come over. Join the conversation. Make a new friend. Get a little bit of help. Maybe get some game ideas. What's the worst that can happen? I don't know. I can't figure it out. Anyways, again, thanks for joining. And until the next video, peace.